And I'm muted. Hey guys, I feel like I'm a little close. Hey guys, welcome to She Knows Arsenal. My name is Jessica. We're going over the most recent Arsenal news and transfer news. So make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me just pull this a little bit closer. I got my camera to work, so we don't have to work with the webcam today. We're going with the good camera, with the good lighting and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully that makes your viewing experience a little bit better. It definitely makes me feel better because, it's not as grainy and all that kind of stuff. I feel like I'm giving you guys the best possible quality. And then, got the mic and all that kind of stuff. Do you guys remember when I used to be in like little office in California and like, do you guys remember that? Like, that was a while ago, and it was, like, just the desk, just the webcam, like, kinda faced upwards. Like, we have definitely leveled up here, definitely leveled up. So and I do it all for you guys because one, I don't want you guys talking about me. And two, I want you guys to like actually enjoy the content. So yeah, let me know if you guys have been at She Knows Arsenal or watching She Knows Arsenal since those days. But if you haven't and you're like kind of new to the channel and all that kind of stuff, make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel, all that kind of stuff, and get in the chat and let me know what you guys are thinking about Arsenal's transfer situation. On today's show, I told you guys yesterday that I probably wouldn't come back until Monday, but I thought in light of kind of some recent reporting around Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, we should probably have like an isolated kind of conversation around who should go, who should stay, and if the midfield is going to be in trouble if those two leave. Uh, Arsenal, I think, over the last two seasons has been so heavily reliant on Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey, and so I think even just one of them leaving will be a little strange. I do. I think it'll be a little strange to see lineups without them in it. But it seems like a very real possibility that one of them, if not both, will leave the Emirates this summer. And that is kind of, I feel like, has left some Arsenal fans feeling anxious around whether or not Arsenal are actually building a title winning squad or if we are kind of building it and tearing it down, building it and tearing it down, and not really getting that level of depth that a lot of people are craving in order for us to really push in the Champions League, the Premier League, Carabao Cup, and FA Cup. So, yeah, but I feel like, talking about each of them in isolation, how they've kind of gotten to the point they are now, um, what they add to the team, who's coming in that could maybe supplement some of the things that they do. And if they were to leave, who would need to come in order to kind of like, if we don't already have players coming in, maybe there are some players out there in the market that we could look at that, bring some of those qualities into the squad. So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about today for sure. Let's see what you guys are talking about. Ali A says, I'm muted. Yeah, I was definitely muted at the beginning. Haven't done that in a while, but it is what it is. Jasper says, I think eventually Partey showed last season that he could not be trusted. Sal Boy says, been here since the first collab with Diluted. That was a long time ago. But yeah, like it's been a journey. It really has. Aha says, Xhaka could stay if Leverkusen don't pay up. Maybe apparently we are demanding more money. The conversation around what fee Arsenal should be looking for in order to allow these two players to go, I think is super important because like we spoke about yesterday, the reason why Arsenal don't sell well is because we wait until players have very little value and then want to sell them. Right now, Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey both have pretty decent value in the market. So Arsenal maybe are looking to sell because there's opportunity there, but we should not be selling for like peanuts. These two players have enough experience and enough quality for us to demand certain fees, and if we don't get them, we should tell those teams to kick rocks, really. AG says Xhaka was class, but I think and I think he should stay. T01 says Rice is the starting six. He will play over 4,000 minutes next season. Partey can go. Lucas says no point of keeping Xhaka if Havertz is his replacement and keeping ESR. Arsenal era says Partey has been very inconsistent and has cost us a lot. I think he would be the one to replace. Yeah, I think both of them have their hits and misses, their pros and cons. Like, I do think there's a little bit of a shift from like Partey was definitely like held on a pedestal for a very long time, while Xhaka was almost being considered somebody that was holding him back. And now it's a little bit of like Xhaka is like the guy and Thomas Partey is like the villain. So it's kind of flip flop. But taking everything into consideration in the entire context of how long these players have been in the team and what good they've done and what bad they've done, I think you can make very strong cases for why both of them should go. Um, and what the ceiling is for this team if they stay. Aha says Partey was consistently good until April season this season, to be honest. Chris says neither Partey has other issues and Xhaka is on the downslope. So yeah, like you guys are already getting in the comments and letting me know what you think, which is amazing. So look, let's start off kind of like, the general thing. Arsenal have already brought in Kai Havertz and are on like the cusp of sealing the deal with Declan Rice. And so that's two midfield options. We can debate till the cows come home whether or not Kai Havertz is actually a midfielder. But based on what Mikel Arteta said in his interview when Kai Havertz was announced, and all of the, reliable journalists that have kind of spoken about this transfer and why it's conspired, like have spoken about Kai Havertz being a midfielder, Arsenal wanting to use him there, him being mismanaged at Chelsea as a false nine. And so the assumption from my perspective is that he is going to play midfield and going to play quite a few minutes there. I know there have been some reports around his wages being at £330,000 per week. I hate the way people report on, wages. I think they take the base fee, they add the bonuses, they put it in euros and then put it out there. Obviously, the source is a little sketchy as well. It's coming from Build, which is a German-based publication, and I think it's in their best interest to make it seem as though the reason why they couldn't get Kai Havertz is because Arsenal were offering him insane wages. I think he's closer to 2,000, pounds per week. But beyond that, like if you're one of our highest earners, you're going to play a significant amount of minutes. And so if you take into consideration the wages and the fee involved with Kai Havertz, plus what Arteta has said and all of those reports have said, he's going to play quite a few minutes in midfield, potentially, as a backup for Odegaard or in the 8 role, that Xhaka was playing. And then you have Declan Rice, like you guys have already kind of said, he's going to be the number 6. He's somebody that plays a lot of minutes. You don't spend 105 million pounds on a player that's not going to play every single minute of every single game. And so it does look like Arsenal are kind of like rejigging the midfield a little bit and looking beyond Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a role to play next season potentially. Before the season ended, we kind of, I think, all assumed that Granit Xhaka would be gone like very quickly, but we haven't really we brought in Kai Havertz, but nothing happened. But now we're about to bring in Declan Rice. Maybe that changes things. Art DeRoche was saying that, Arsenal, this kind of came out today, that Arsenal, are in no desperate need to sell Granit Xhaka. And maybe things with Declan Rice would, change, Arsenal's need to sell him. But at the moment, they don't feel like it's anything that they have to do. And so you can look at that of one of two ways, that maybe Arsenal are changing their mind a little bit on who they want to move on. Maybe Thomas Partey's, likely exit from the club is making them second guess, Granit Xhaka staying at the club, so we don't lose too many experienced players at once. Or, Arsenal want to pressure Bayer Leverkusen into spending more money. You guys can let me know in the chat what you think. But Granit Xhaka, this season has definitely changed, I think, a lot of people's view on him. For the last 6 years, he's kind of been a player that people have not loved, and we don't have to go through all of it, but we know why people didn't love him that much. Now this season has kind of come and gone, and he scored goals and got assists, played a big role in Arsenal's season, and people are, wanting him to stay at least for one more season. I think, the time has come to move on from Granit Xhaka personally. I think no matter how well he did this season, I would have always felt that way, because he's such a big personality on and off the pitch that I feel like, you know, in order to get the most out of Granit Xhaka, he has to be a big part of the team and an ever-present, person in the starting 11, and I'm not quite sure that putting him in a squad role necessarily, like, gets the best out of him, and I wonder what he would be like as a substitute, somebody who's not playing that many minutes, and I just think there's a ceiling with Granit Xhaka. I don't think that he's necessarily as good as people are making him out to seem. Now, he's had a great season, but I think having a good season and being like an elite level player are two different things, and I think he's only almost like slightly overrated at this point. And keeping Granit Xhaka in the role that he plays right now with the introduction of Kai Havertz kind of blocks the path for, Emil Smith Rowe and or Vieira. And these are two players that I feel like definitely need playing time. They need a path, like they need an obvious way for them to get into the team. And if you already have Odegaard and you have Kai Havertz, who are going to probably start games, if you continue on with Granit Xhaka, who will naturally be the next person up, then that takes away, I think, minutes for Emil Smith Rowe and Vieira, who desperately need those in order to develop. We're never going to know whether or not they're good enough if they don't get the playing time. So, from my perspective, like, I can see the reasons why you'd want to keep Granit Xhaka, but I can also see very glaring reasons why he needs to be moved on. But the one thing that he has that, Thomas Partey doesn't really possess is that leadership, and with, you know, Declan Rice coming in, who's a natural leader, there's still, I do feel like we lack a little bit of that. There's a lot of young players in the team. And so losing somebody like Granit Xhaka, I think you would be kind of like searching a little bit for those leaders, especially in the dressing room. But he's had a really good season. I can see why people want him to stay, but I can see so many reasons why he needs to be moved on. And one of the biggest ones for me is Emil Smith Rowe and Vieira need a pathway that's obvious for them to get those minutes. If Kai Havertz can't play or Odegaard can't play, we can't lean upon Granit Xhaka. We have to throw Vieira and ESR into the fire to know whether or not they're good enough. So yeah, Mr. Gamer says, I think Vieira should go on loan. Nicholas says, unless we get Real Madrid kid or attempt to hijack Caicedo from Chelsea, Partey needs to stay. AG says, it's good to have young players, but we will need a few experienced vets. Yeah, like if you were to get rid of Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, you pretty much just have like Jorginho as your super experienced vet. And then, you have Jesus and Zinchenko, who have quite a bit of experience, but they're still kind of young as well. Like, I think Zinchenko might be like 26. Jesus might be 26 as well. So you lose quite a bit there. I agree with that. Let's see. Rattle Boy, thank you so much for your super chat, says, I would let Xhaka leave on a free next summer. We all know why they are trying to get rid of Partey, and we should before we can't. Yeah, I mean, you could let Granit Xhaka leave on a free, but again, there's that thing in the back of my mind that's like, if we were to keep Granit Xhaka and let's say that he's not as good as he was last season, he ends up being somebody that doesn't really help us go to the next level. People will be crying about how we didn't take, 20 million this summer. And so sometimes, I feel like Xhaka's a little bit of a comfort blanket. He's somebody that you kind of know what you're going to get from him, and he's a known quantity. And so keeping him feels more safe and secure and comforting than allowing Emil Smith Rowe or Vieira to step into that backup position that Xhaka would inevitably be in this season. So I can kind of understand that. But like, there is an alternate universe where we sell Granit Xhaka for 20 million pounds, and it's like a really good chunk of money that we can take and attribute to another signing. And either one or both of Emil Smith Rowe and Vieira actually go to the next level and end up being really good options for us next season. I feel like the almost like assumption by a lot of Arsenal fans is that neither of them will be good enough. And I actually think there's a good chance that they will be good enough. They just need more playing time. John P says, Jess, I have a concern. If we play two attacking eights, we need a brilliant number 6. Rice is the guy, but Jorginho being a backup worries me for depth. Jorginho needs to help in the middle. I will star that because I think that's an interesting point to kind of expand more on when we talk about Thomas Partey. Matt G says, I think we should move on from Xhaka, let him leave on a high. You don't want him to become a villain again. And if he were to become the Xhaka that we knew from before, can't replicate the form of this past season, or, Kai Havertz were to get injured or something like that, and Xhaka was going to play and, like I said, doesn't hit those heights again, he instantly becomes the villain again. And I kind of agree. Let him leave on a high, get 20 million for Bayer Leverkusen and move on. I just feel like it makes so much sense. Kashimomo says, Jess, what are the first few physical attributes you look for in a player? I mean, most players that I tend to like are, especially like midfield players, tend to be taller, more athletic, ball carriers, box to box ability. That's usually what I look at. I tend to like midfielders and defenders. Like, those are the types of players I usually gravitate towards. And my template for a midfielder has always kind of been Vieira. So it's always like I put Vieira up there and then I say, are you like him in any way, shape, or form? And I work backwards from there. So Vieira is the physical attributes I look for in a player, and to discern whether or not I think they're good enough or not. It's not the best way to do things because Vieira was outstanding, and he kind of he was a different uh you know uh era of midfielder where you didn't have the third midfielder per se, so you kind of had to do it all. You had to be defensive and offensive and stuff like that. But I like a midfielder that's taller, physical, a little bit of a bastard, and has the ability to like run people over, run through people, and carry the ball. And that's why I've never been a fan of Granit Xhaka, by the way, is because he can't carry the ball. And I think that leaves you in a position of vulnerability in midfield, because if they cut off the passing lanes and you can't dribble through people, you can't win fouls, you can't bypass the press. Like, it's very difficult to like get beyond. And when we played, like, in particular, when we played Everton away from home and we lost that game, I found it very frustrating that we didn't have a single player in our midfield that could progress the ball beyond the lines. Like, they were just kind of standing there looking for the passes, and Everton had them very nicely cut off. So, yeah, that's what I look for. Femi says, you are absolutely right, Jess. What will Xhaka's attitude be like coming off the bench? History shows he might not handle it well, potentially bad for team chemistry. He is such like, the guy. He has to be the guy. And I don't see him in a role. I've never seen him in a role where he hasn't been a starter, a leader kind of guy. And so I think he has to go for that that's a big reason why I think he has to go. A big reason. Let's see. Um, Philip says the questionnaire needs to be both or none option, in my opinion. The reason why I didn't give both or none is because I wanted you to just choose if you had to. So we know we have other options of keeping both or letting both go, but I wanted you to actually have to choose. Let me actually look at the poll and see what you guys are saying. So 36% of you guys say Xhaka should stay. 64% of you guys said Partey should stay. That is a huge swing from a couple of minutes ago, like, or before I started the show, and people had started actually like putting in their votes. It actually was heavily favored more towards Granit Xhaka to stay, which is interesting. Let's see. Charlie says we need a midfield revamp. Sell both. Rebuild the middle with legs. Xhaka had a once off. Let him leave on a good high note. I like that. Absis says if we have to keep one, I would keep Granit Xhaka. I just wonder, like, if you were to keep Granit, then I just don't see the natural pathway for either one of Vieira or Emile Smith Rowe. And I'm very much so looking forward to the two of them getting more minutes. And I think Granit actively kind of keeps that from happening. And so then you end up having, if you let Thomas Partey go and you keep Granit Xhaka, then you have like 6 players that can play those 8/10 roles. And I think that's too many guys that can do kind of similar things and are kind of blocking each other. So yeah, like, I can see reasons why you'd wanna keep Xhaka, but he just seems like the easiest guy to kind of, like, just move aside based on the squad build at the moment. Um, Bob says, "Liverpool are officially in for Lavia. What's your feeling about this?" I feel absolutely nothing. Unless Thomas Partey goes, I don't see Arsenal really moving for another number 6, and as much as I like Lavia and I think he's a very talented young player, I'm not that fussed, you know, we've pretty much secured our number 1 target, which is Declan Rice, and so the only reason why you need Lavia is if Thomas Partey left, and I would imagine that Arsenal know that Liverpool are in for Lavia, and so if they're unable to move on Thomas Partey quick enough to beat Liverpool to Lavia, I'm sure they have other options, so I don't feel much with the Lavia situation, if I'm honest. Hit says, "Just joined." Thank you so much, for your super chat. Says, "Just joined, but reports are AFC don't wanna let Partey go, don't wanna let Partey go, but the player wants to leave. Do you question that mentality unless there are false?" That's interesting because I've heard different things. Charles Watts was saying that Thomas Partey wants to stay at Arsenal, and play, Champions League with Arsenal, so I'm not sure what to believe. I believe when it comes to Thomas Partey that there's a little bit of cat and mouse here. I actually think Arsenal want Thomas Partey to go, um, for multiple reasons, and he probably doesn't want to go, but he'd be willing to go if he could go where he wants to, or if Arsenal paid him quite well to leave. Um, that's how I think it's actually going. But if Thomas Partey does want to go, I think he'll push to go somewhere that he wants to go. And the one place that he did say that he wanted to go, or a report said he wanted to go, was Juventus. The issue with Juventus is that they don't have cash. And so if they don't have the money, then he can't go. So that's the crap part about wanting to sell somebody like Thomas Partey is like, if he has a certain place in mind and that place doesn't necessarily have the money, then we're in a bad spot. I don't think you should be selling Thomas Partey for anything less than 30 million. And I don't think Juventus have that. I really don't. Um, Adabi, sorry if I messed that up, says, "Please release Xhaka and retain Partey to start our away games." John P says, "Granite won't like holding bench." AS says, "Keep Granite more reliable and consistent in terms of fitness, whereas Partey's injury record is not that great at all." I think with the two of them, what you ideally want is for neither one of them to be the players that you're relying upon, for the most part. And so if our midfield would end up kind of being like Havertz, Odegaard, and Rice, then, I actually think Thomas Partey ends up being a better option off the bench than Granit Xhaka because, like we already kind of spoke about, I don't see Granit Xhaka in like any sort of backup role. But Thomas Partey has played not bit part, but squad roles at other clubs, like at Atletico. Like he was not the guy. Like when you actually go back to his role at Atletico, like sometimes he started, sometimes he didn't. A lot of times he started in big games, and so there could be a world where Thomas Partey doesn't start every single game, but offers Arsenal the like ability to play with him in the sixth role and Declan Rice pushed up a little bit further, especially when we play against like the Newcastles away, the Liverpools away, where it's a lot more of a physical game than it would be like most games when we're at home, when we're controlling possession. And so I could actually see a world where Thomas Partey ends up being a better squad player and a better option off the bench, where I just don't see Granit Xhaka in any squad role ever. Like I just don't see it. So yeah. Let's see what you guys are saying. Neil says, "I'd keep Partey all day long over Granit Xhaka." Femi says, "How do you think Vieira fits in the team now that we have all these changes? Who is best suited to play with when he is on? The jury is still out on him." The thing with Vieira is that you guys know, like with Vieira, like he was disappointing in the first season. I would say I agree with you guys in the most part that he wasn't as good as I think we had hoped. But I also apply all the context to it around what his first team experience had already been, which isn't much. He was always kind of felt like a project to me and somebody that needed to be able to adapt to the Premier League, but also like needs the right type of foundation behind him in order to make sure that like he's not swallowed up by too many like defensive. He's not ever going to be like a defensive box to box type of midfielder. So the thing is like now we have 3 8s or 3 8/10s. Let's just call them attacking midfielders. I think even putting the numbers to them confuses things because when you say a number 8, you expect a box to box player. But Arsenal look like they're moving into double tens, where they're going to play like Havertz and Odegaard together. And then that's why you need a different number 6. You need an all action number 6 that is actually better defensively, more agile, can move across the pitch, somebody that intercepts well, that if we get beat, could actually catch up to people. And so I think that's where Declan Rice comes in, is because he can allow for that foundation to be a lot more sturdy and reliable, and defensively sound, because you have 2 number 10s in front of you that don't really offer you that same security that like a Granit Xhaka would. And that's where I think, Vieira ends up being most utilized. I think him and ESR and Havertz and Odegaard end up being double tens, and based on like who you're playing or what kind of game, what kind of cup it is, you will change the dynamics based on what those players have. And I think they're all really different. I think Odegaard, Havertz, ESR, and Vieira all very different. They offer different things, different qualities. Like Vieira, I think, has a better final ball, and he's a better final action, like assist type player than ESR. I don't think ESR is a very good passer at all. But what he offers in terms of like running into the box and movement and stuff like that, and the ability to carry the ball, is something that Vieira doesn't have. We know Odegaard, we know what he's all about. And then Havertz, we're still kind of trying to figure that out. But we know his movement in the box, his height, things like that will end up being really beneficial for Arsenal. So I think with all of them, they will all play in the attacking mid roles. That's what I think, including Vieira. And the way that you allow that to happen is to have somebody behind them that is kind of like an all action midfielder that can kind of sweep up things on their own. With Thomas Partey, I think this is a good segue into, the Thomas Partey conversation. Is as good as he is on the ball, I don't think he's somebody that, can do the number 6 role by himself without some hand holding. And most players are like that. This is no shade on Thomas Partey, but most players need other players around them with different qualities, and those qualities come together and make a good partnership. And so partnerships are always important. We know that like Gabriel and Saliba are a great partnership because what Gabriel is good at, Saliba may not be as good at, and vice versa. And they come together and make yin and yang. And I think with Thomas Partey, his kind of like dynamics go really well with Granit Xhaka, but they also go well with Zinchenko. Zinchenko played basically like a pivot next to Thomas Partey all last season. So Thomas could kind of focus more on, dominating the area, where Zinchenko dominated a lot of the ball. To have a midfielder, a number 6 that can do both by themselves is very difficult. And that's where somebody like Rodri really stands out, is because he can do all of it. He's good on the ball. He, is very good at snuffing out danger, understanding where the danger is going to come from, being smart in terms of like dark arts and stuff like that. Like he's a very well-rounded number 6, and that's why he's probably the best in the world right now. Thomas Partey in some games I do think lacks a little bit of that and needs a little bit of like other players around him to make it work. And that's where Declan Rice comes in, because I think Arteta kind of sees Declan Rice as that all action. He needs more development, I think, on the ball, but he's going to have that ability to like snuff out danger, work on the ball as well, and maybe relieve the need for having Zinchenko do so much of the work on the ball, because Zinchenko was doing a lot. He was doing a lot of heavy lifting in there. And so, yeah, I think that's why Thomas Partey is probably being, you know, moved on or looked at as surplus to requirements or somebody that we can't really rely upon. But he's such a good player that it would be a shame if we couldn't just have him on the bench as well. But I'm not sure if that's likely at this point. But yeah, um, Partey, so good on the ball, but lacks a little bit of that like off the ball stuff that, the best DMs in the world kind of have. It's so crazy. Like it really is, like when Thomas is on it, he's so, so good. But when he's not on it, he needs a lot of hand holding. He needs a lot of help. It's one of those. Saksham says Liverpool are going for the title. They were always a good team, so I'm not really worried about what they're doing at the moment. Kamal says, to be fair, Partey is much better at breaking lines with passes than Rice. The interesting thing about that, Kamal, is that Thomas Partey is very good on the ball, but I think we haven't seen how much Rice can actually do on the ball because West Ham and England are very pragmatic. And so we're going to learn a lot more about what Declan Rice can actually do on the ball when he plays in a more progressive system where we can actually give him the ball with angles, tons of options around him, and see what he can do. I think where Declan Rice really shines is diagonal passing, his long balls, carrying the ball as well, and his defensive, you know, his defensive like awareness. Like he's really good at like snuffing out danger. Whether or not he has the through passes and the line breaking passes is something that I feel like we'll learn a little bit more about him in the future. But I wouldn't say for sure that we know he can't do it. Will he be as good as Thomas Partey at it? I'm not sure. It'll be interesting to see. Ali A says, you are salty, Jess. Liverpool is City's biggest rivals. The City coming up. No, I'm not. I'm actually not salty at all. Like, I love what my club is doing. Like, I'm very relaxed. You guys have always been a good team, and I never said you guys weren't, but I'd be lying if I said I was like worried about it in any way because I'd be more worried if Arsenal weren't taking care of business, but they are. So there's no salt there. Sorry if that's what you're looking for. Matthew says Jorginho is better technically on the ball than Rice, and Partey just not physically. So I guess that's another part of the conversation as well, is Jorginho and what role he plays. It's already been like ruled out. Like his exit has been ruled out. And towards the end of the season, he did a lot of the like Thomas Partey never played. Did he play again? Like, or no, he did play again, but he never got his position back after the Man City game. And Jorginho was playing, and here's the thing. I thought that him and Kivior did well against Newcastle. So when we played against Newcastle, we won that game. I thought the two of them did really quite well. The problem is that like you could see that there was still like Kivior is not Saliba and Jorginho is not Thomas Partey, but they did a good job on the day. But you have to do like taking Kivior out of it with Jorginho, you have to have the right ingredients around him. Just like I said with Thomas Partey, like there's some hand holding that needs to be done in order to make that work. And most of your backups are going to kind of have that. I think most players that don't start are going to have some flaws that you have to account for, and that's why they're not starting for you. So Rice will be somebody that no hand holding, doesn't need anything around him, can kind of just hold his own, and is an all-rounder type of player. Where Jorginho, he needs some hand holding. So is he good enough to be the only backup as a number 6 or to be the next man up? I don't know. How I view Jorginho is more of like the El Neni replacement. I think he ends up being El Neni's replacement where he's third down the line. And then if Thomas Partey were to go, then you need to add somebody else in there. Now, if Caicedo is gone and, Lavia is gone, then I think, I don't know what Arteta and Edu are cooking, but I hope it's somebody that can step right in, because if something were to happen to Rice, which I don't think it will, but if something were to happen, I think relying upon Jorginho for a significant amount of time could end up hurting you. Jorginho is the type of player you want playing a couple of games, not a lot of games. So yeah, Jorginho's role, he's there. He's going to be a part of the squad. I think he adds great experience. He's a winner. He's won things before. And so he's nice to have in the squad, but he's definitely not somebody that you want to rely upon. And, that's where the gap comes. If Thomas Partey goes, there has to be somebody that comes in that kind of knows what they're doing, is kind of similar to him in some ways, because you don't want to lose that athleticism. Like, you don't want another Jorginho. You want somebody with that athleticism and that physicality, And even though Thomas Partey, I don't think has the same defensive awareness as Rice, you don't want another Jorginho, if that makes sense. So yeah, it's interesting. Let's see, I starred one of these messages as well. John P saying, like, Jess, I have a concern. If we play 2 attacking 8s, we need a brilliant number 6, but Jorginho as the backup worries me for depth. Jorginho needs help in the middle. And so that's what I was kind of talking about right then, is that, like, Jorginho needs that help. And although I think we can provide that for him, like, I think if Jorginho has, let's just say he has, the usual back four, like a different back four. Let's say he has Tommy, Gabriel, Saliba, and White behind him. I think he's fine. But if a couple of those players are out, and like, one thing that really scared me last season is seeing Zinchenko and Jorginho next to each other. I think that pivot didn't work. And then inevitably you had Xhaka in front of them. And that was kind of like diabolical to me. So we need to avoid that with like everything in our spirit. So that's why another physical number 6 needs to come in, or somebody that can play in that position. Because a couple of injuries, and we're going to be seeing Zinchenko and Jorginho next to each other in a pivot. And that is so scary. It is. Saksham says, thoughts on Monaco's Fofana instead of Lavia. Watching some of the clips, and then also like kind of remembering him from the World Cup, I think he's a good player. He looks interesting. I think he could physically be up to the Premier League and stuff. I just wonder about, the French league and how that translates, But I think one thing that the French league does well is midfielders, like DMs, midfielders, like defenders. I think if you get players from that league that play in those positions, you're fine. What I would avoid from that league is maybe like more attackers. So maybe he's good enough. But he's not Thomas Partey. I know that, so it's filling that gap is going to be so difficult if he goes. Yo-Yo says Jorginho needs to play with center backs in the back line. He can't play with Zin or Timber. I agree. Ngoni says, I don't think you have presented Partey's case well, Jess. During his time with Arsenal, his problem has been fitness, not form. I think his personal issues and losing Saliba killed him. Well, I mean, like, I agree with those things. Like, it's been fitness, but at the same time, like, we never really got confirmation whether or not at the end of this season it was fitness. We assume so, but he just had like major head loss at the end of the season. Like, I'm not sure that him trying to flick the ball over Declan Rice when we were 2-0 up against West Ham was a fitness issue. And so every isolated incident that I remember of Thomas Partey in these final games, maybe it was his fitness and, that made him make mistakes. But like, the reality, like, Thomas Partey is just not somebody that we can really rely upon. And so, yeah, like, I would prefer him to stay, because I think that like Rice, Jorginho, and Thomas Partey, like, you're fine. But I can make very strong arguments why this is probably a decent time to move him on. But I kind of agree. Like, Thomas Partey is a very talented player. Like, he's a top midfielder. On his day, he's like the only center, like defensive midfielder that's better than him is Rodri. So there's definitely that. But you kind of mentioned the personal issues. When you're saying that I didn't represent his case well, his personal issues, if you're saying that that's probably a reason why, I think his personal issues are one of the biggest reasons why you need to maybe move him on. So yeah, I just want to put it out there that like Thomas Partey is a very good player. Like, I don't think he's crap. I think he's very good. I think he's not as well rounded as like Rodri, and that's why I don't think you can consider him the best in the world or one of the best in the world. But when everything's working and he has the right players around him, he performs at a very high level. And so losing him would definitely hurt us in terms of our squad depth. But 2 years left on his deal. Personal issues, fitness issues, large wages. Maybe it's the time to move him on. You just have to replace well. Cavino says, I think a Jorginho plus Lavia midfield would work for cup games. Yeah, I mean, I don't really see us playing anything other than one number 6. That's what we kind of always play. But let's say that, we inverted on the other side and Timber played next to Jorginho. Depending on who is also back there, I think it's okay for certain games. But idealistically, you want like Rice, playing in that position. And if he's not there, somebody else that has the physical capabilities. But Jorginho's a very good player. He's just not, he's a very specific type of player, very specific type of player. And everything has to kind of be perfect around him for it to work. Neil says Partey walks into most big teams around the world. Definitely can't say that about Xhaka. I think that's an interesting point about who's better. I think we know that Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey, if you just say who's the better player, there's not really much conversation to be had. Thomas Partey is a much better player than I think Granit Xhaka is. But that's not the only thing to consider. You have to consider everything: leadership, personality, attitude, availability, injury record, the wages, contracts, everything, and who you already have in those positions. So yeah, but of course, like Thomas Partey is better than Granit Xhaka. There's no real question about it. Saksham says Ward Prowse is an upgrade on Xhaka. Duke Thomas says neither Partey nor Xhaka nor Rice can boss a game against the top 5. These are pivotal games you must win. All the above is fact. See the end of last season. Well, I would say you have to take Rice out of that. I would say you have to take Rice out of that because we don't actually know what he can do in a team like Arsenal. So I would say, Partey and Xhaka for sure, because we've seen it. They've been in a good Arsenal team and they haven't really been able to get over that next level of like bossing the top teams. Like I thought some of their poor games were against the better teams. I thought some of our players' best games were against the better teams, like Saka and Martinelli. I thought they really stood out against the better teams. I thought Xhaka and Partey weren't as great against the better teams. And when I say the better teams, I mean like Liverpool, City, those games. I thought they had not as great games. So we know that there's a ceiling with Thomas Partey and Granit Xhaka, but to say Rice can't boss a game against the top 5, you can't really say that until you've seen him in a better team. He's been playing with West Ham, and I don't know if you guys watch West Ham, but whenever I watch them play, it's actually like a very sad situation. Like, no offense to like their players or anything like that, but like the level is just so different between West Ham and Arsenal. And so I would say you can't really say that about Rice yet. But if we spend 100 million on him, I would hope that he can. Triple C says, had we had signed a top class 8, people would be okay with letting Xhaka go. Gooners are just skeptical about Havertz and Vieira. Yeah, and like I've been saying this over the last couple of days. I think this constant like we need another number 8, we need another we need another attacking mid, we need this, we need this. When we don't actually need that, just comes from not trusting the players that we have. Like people are like, well, we don't have enough players, like we don't have enough depth. We do, you just don't trust the players that are there, which is valid. If you don't trust Havertz, which makes total sense. Like nobody was saying like let's sign Kai Havertz before the transfer window started. But with Havertz, Vieira, ESR, and Odegaard, you have more than enough players that can play in those attacking mid roles. It's just whether or not ESR and Vieira can really step up. And I think if Granit Xhaka stays, you're not going to really be able to see whether or not they can do it because Granit Xhaka will block them from those opportunities. I think they need more opportunities, like I've said before, and I think I trust them maybe a little bit more than other people do. Um, but I totally understand not trusting them because you've watched them, like, so I get that. Um, harm Harm? Yeah, Harm says, keep Partey. I think he would get more minutes. I think Arteta has plans for the season without Xhaka, but losing Partey would mean we have to adjust our recruitment plan for the summer. Could be a risk. The thing about this, though, you guys, though, is like, as I think they did always kind of like plan to move on from Granit Xhaka. But some of the reports that I'm seeing are Arsenal want to move on from Partey, so they clearly have plans without him, and they clearly feel like they can replace him. I think it's more a matter of getting the right fee and him actually wanting to go, rather than Arsenal feeling like he just upped one. He, I don't think he woke up, the day after the last day of the season and said, "You know what? I want to leave Arsenal." I don't think that's what happened. I think Arsenal told him that, like, we're looking to move you on, and so it's a matter of getting the fee and him saying, "Yeah, I'll go." So Arsenal clearly have plans without him. They've already spoken to Lavia, and like whether we get him or not, they've recruited for that position. So I think they have something planned, whether it's a player that we know about or not. It's just a matter of Thomas Partey moving on. It kind of sucks for him, I think, because we're finally in Champions League and he's not going to be a part of it. Potentially, after being a big part of how we've gotten back to it. But them's be the breaks. Like, ruthlessness, I think, is something that we've always asked for from Arsenal. And this feels uncomfortable because maybe we prefer Arsenal to be ruthless with other players. But, if they feel like they can replace Thomas Partey, get the money for him, and go to the next level, then that's just, we have to hope that it works out. But yeah, it's kind of a shame that we won't see Thomas Partey maybe play for Arsenal in the Champions League, but that's kind of the reality. Eric says I will be comfortable when we leave Partey and Xhaka, but we sign a proper partner to Rice, not Lavia. Lavia can't start every game. Yeah, I mean, I think what Arsenal are gonna want is for them to have the option to play Rice and Havertz and Odegaard, but also play Odegaard, Rice in a different number 6. So, like I said, in the difficult games, more physical games, we have more of a presence in midfield. So, Lavi is somebody that doesn't fill me with the most confidence just because of how young he is and kind of green. So hopefully, if Thomas Partey were to go, there'd be a decent option out there. I don't see that option just yet, but maybe it's somebody that we haven't thought about. MM says if we can get 50 million for both, I can see us getting a quality CM who can play both as a 6 and a 8. Yeah, and that's another part of it is like the fee. The fee is so important. I think seeing reports that Arsenal want 20 million for Granit Xhaka instead of like the 13 to 15 that they were originally asking for me is the right thing. We should not be giving these players away. We should be asking for a decent fee, and 20 million for Granit Xhaka with 1 year left on his deal is a good fee. Now, Thomas Partey shouldn't be selling him for any less than 30 million, but like you said, if you get 50 million for the two of them, you add, maybe a fee for Tierney and Balogun, you're talking about, potentially being able to reach 100 million in sales and being able to bring in a quality midfielder. Somebody that I think we should keep our eye out for is Amadou Onana. He's somebody that's still looking for a club. He can play in the 6 or the 8 role. And if we're not able to get Caicedo or Lavia, I wouldn't be surprised if we look towards him. We've been linked to him before. He wouldn't be my first choice. You guys know I'm not a fan of Amadou Onana, but I'm just saying watch out for it because it could happen. Because he would cost like what Everton are gonna ask for 50, we'll end up at 35. Like, so yeah. Muhammad says we need to keep those two if, for example, Kai don't perform well in Xhaka role as well, which I know Kai will never do well in that position. Well, again, like I had people telling me that we wouldn't sign Declan Rice and Edu was a fraud. And then I said, okay, well, if it happens, will you come back and say that you got it wrong? And a lot of those people haven't come back. So I want to, like Mohammed, if you don't think Kai Havertz will play in that role, and if he does, he won't do well, let's, make sure you come back, when the season starts or even in preseason, because I would put money down that one, he'll play in that position, and two, he'll actually be quite good at it. So just make sure you come back and we'll have a conversation on who got it right. But Kai Havertz is going to play in the 8 role, the attacking mid role, the Xhaka role. Like, he's going to play there. Like, Arteta all but said it. It's happening. Score says, don't get why Arsenal are so bad at selling players. We can get 30 million for Xhaka right now, and we can sell 65 million for Partey. If that was Chelsea, they get those fees for him. Well, it's not. I don't think you could get 65 million for Thomas Partey. 2 years left on his deal with the inevitable cloud, like the cloud over his head. Like, we're not the only team that knows about it. Everybody knows that the allegations are there. So the idea that we're going to sell him for 65 million, like, doesn't actually wash. Arsenal are not as good at selling as other clubs because our players, one, it's reputation and perception. So Chelsea have the perception that the players that they have are maybe mismanaged but quite talented. Arsenal have the reputation for having poor recruitment and buying players that aren't very good. Then we wait until the players don't have any value, and then we sell them for too cheap. This summer is going to be super important. I think Arsenal fans have to have realistic expectations of how much we can actually get for a player. But also, Arsenal, this is like kind of the first time that they've had players that are actually quite attractive in the market. But saying, oh, if Chelsea had Thomas Partey, they would sell him for 65 million. The only players that they sold for those fees were Kai Havertz and Mount. And not only are they 6 years, maybe 7 years younger than Thomas Partey, but they were always considered very talented young players. So, yeah. Also, they're going from a Premier League team to another Premier League team. So that also makes it easier to sell. If you wanted to sell Kai Havertz or Mount to Bayern Munich, you would have to take a smaller fee because Europe can't afford Premier League prices. So if you could find a Premier League team that would buy a 30-year-old Thomas Partey for 65 million, let me know what club that is, because if you're not selling to another Premier League team that's stupid, then you're never going to get that fee. And if you're selling to Europe, you might as well slash that whole fee in half. So the 65 million is a stretch. I basically feel like what you're trying to say is Arsenal can't sell, but Chelsea can. The scenarios are completely different. The type of players that they have in order, like, that they could sell are completely different. The perception of both clubs based on historical damage that's been done from an Arsenal perspective and recruitment are completely different. So nobody's selling Thomas Partey for 65 million. That is a reach. That is the biggest reach. We may not be great at selling, but the idea that, like, Arsenal could sell Thomas Partey for 65 million is the reach of a century. Philip says, we need to avenge ourselves by sniping Caicedo. Then we have the second best midfield in the world. I think Caicedo is pretty much a Chelsea player. Like, it's done. So yeah. But it would have been nice to be able to do the Caicedo thing, but it's not happening. I don't think. So yeah, Lawrence says, Jess, how does Thomas Partey go from being one of the best DMs in the league to being surplus to requirements? Doesn't even make sense when we lack depth. Again, next season, people will see how daft this convo was. Not necessarily. I think people, like, first of all, that whole sentence of how do you go from being one of the best DMs in the league to being surplus to requirements removes all context, removes everything from the conversation, and only is talking about his talent. And that's it. We know that selling a player, moving a player on is not just about talent. It's about everything connected to it. And so without having to go through the list again, I think, yeah, if we were only considering whether or not Thomas Partey is a good player or not, you absolutely keep him. But if you take everything into consideration, you can make very strong arguments about why he could and should be moved on this summer. But yeah, like, idealistically, you keep him. But there's enough there to make a pretty good argument. Zani says, I mean, we sold Kova for 30 million and he's 29. Just saying, Xhaka going for 20 million doesn't have like, first of all, it doesn't have only to do with age. It's about the profile of the player and the perception of the player. Kovacic has won Champions League before. He's like a known winner, and like, you're not selling Kovacic to a team in Europe. You're selling Kovacic to Manchester City. So if Xhaka had any eyes on him from the Premier League, so in order for Xhaka to like another Premier League team, let's say if first of all, if Man City were in for him, Xhaka is a much better player than we ever thought, right? Kovacic, known winner, been around for a long time, has a certain skill set, but he's being sold to Manchester City, which means you can get a bigger fee. If Kovacic was going to go anywhere else, to Bayern Munich, to Juventus, to any of these teams, you'd have to cut that in half because Europe doesn't have the same amount of money. So again, when we talk about transfers, moving players on, and how much what the fee should be or what the fee could be, you have to take into consideration who's willing to buy that player. So yeah, that's what, like, it's just, to me, it's like kind of that simple. So just to say, well, Kovacic is 29 and Xhaka is 30, so you should be able to get the same fee, takes away all the context of who you're selling to, the profile of both players, the perception of both players. And Kovacic and Xhaka are not on the same level. Kovacic he's like, when you talk about players and their levels, Xhaka is probably like a good player. Kovacic is probably considered like a much better player than Granit Xhaka on the market. So yeah, it's just that simple. Um, so yeah. Eric says Xhaka was very important and still important. I can't forget the tackle he made when Willock was like on goal to score against us. I can't see Havertz doing that. I've seen that doing the rounds, this whole thing about Xhaka made a tackle, and Havertz can't, so they can't play the same position. That's all based on this season's dynamics, and since Arteta's been here every single season, he's changed the dynamics, the team has changed, the way that we played has changed, we've added new layers to the team, but Arteta has tried to play double tens a lot of times, like, more than once with different players, and so it's something that I think Arteta's played with and something that he wants to do, and so saying that Havertz can't play in an attacking mid role for Arsenal because he can't do the same tackle that Xhaka did one time, for me, doesn't really make sense because the dynamics could change next season. If you don't have Zinchenko behind you and you have Kivior or Tomiyasu, a better defender behind you, and Timber is inverting next to Rice, then you don't need Havertz to make that tackle. You have enough defensive-minded players there to make that tackle. And it's just one tackle. Like, that position is not based on Granit Xhaka and what his attributes are. We don't need a clone of Xhaka or a better version of Xhaka. I think we need a player that offers us more in attack, really. So, yeah, but that one tackle, I keep seeing people talk about it, and it's frustrating because I'm like, yeah, well, if you have more defensive players behind that player, you don't need Xhaka to make that tackle. But yeah, Magic says, plus he's a better player than Granit Xhaka, talking about Kovacic. Exactly, like, it's just that simple. Kovacic is, like, on the market, is a more attractive and more valuable player than Granit Xhaka. That's probably why Granit Xhaka is going to end up at Bayer Leverkusen and Kovacic is going to Manchester City. And when you're selling to Premier League clubs, you get more money. So yeah, Granit Xhaka is probably going to go for like 20 million, and that's a good enough fee for him. All things considered. The Sheikh AFC says, the most important thing this season for Arteta is keeping every player happy, as he can't see beyond the first 11 and put trust in others. Massive season for Arteta coming up. So important. So important. I cannot stress how important squad management is going to be for Mikel Arteta next season. He's going to live and die by that, I think, for sure. Sam, I was just going to call you Samful, says Partey thrashed Spurs home and away. His performance at Tottenham Stadium. I'm going to be honest, I don't really view Tottenham as like a benchmark for how good our players are. I think based on how bad they were last season and how bad Chelsea were last season, those games we should be winning home and away. The games that I really look at are Liverpool home and away, Man City home and away, Manchester United home and away. And I think, when you look at those performances and how well the entire team did, but also individual performances, I think there's levels to get to in order for Arsenal to be really competitive in those games. Um, at home against Liverpool, I felt very strongly in that first half that our midfield was not great. We got the early goal, which is great, but our midfield was getting ran through. Liverpool's midfield tends to run through us quite often, and we need something different in there. Attacking wise, we were great, but midfield wise, we had some issues. We got a lot better in the second half. I thought in the first half against Manchester United at home, similar. Um, the midfield, there's levels to go up. There definitely is. Saksham says, knowing Edu, he'll get Ndidi for 20 million. That guy's awful. Temadoyo says, with all the funds that have been spent, it is best Arteta wins a major trophy next season. Christoph says, Saka apparently had an Achilles injury he was nursing for an extended period at the end of the season. He and the club need someone to be able to step in for him and give him time off. Yeah, that would be great. Andre says, Havertz will surprise with his positional awareness, and he can press really well. He is also 6'4". His stature is underrated, but Arteta does need to nail his squad rotation. It's going to be so funny in preseason when Havertz is sitting in that Xhaka position, and people that are screaming at me right now saying he's not going to play that position are going to have egg on their face, because it's not something that I'm just making up. It's literally what's been written up by most journalists that understand the situation and why Havertz is coming to Arsenal anyway. And Arteta said it himself that he's playing midfield. He's a midfielder. He's adding quality to the midfield. He's going to play midfield at Arsenal. Like, we will come back to these conversations. Only Gunnar says, hopefully he trusts next season's squad more than the last. He didn't screw up. He didn't rate the depth players. It's big for Arteta, I think, to get that right, for sure. I cannot stress it enough. He needs to get more out of this team. I don't think, any our depth is as bad as people think it is. We just don't see them enough. They don't get enough love, and players need that. They need encouragement, and you're not encouraged when even if you play well, you're not going to start the next game. You have no chance to. The only time you're going to play is in Europa League squad. That's not encouraging, so yeah. Let's see. Alistair Ben says, I think people are forgetting Jorge. Who's Jorge? Jorge. Who's Jorge? Jorginho. That's who you're talking about. Jorginho. Yeah, a lot of people are forgetting Jorginho. I think he's it's weird that Granit Xhaka and Thomas Partey are on the chopping block, but he's like chilling. So funny. Yo-Yo says squad management wasn't important. Management wasn't important next season. It's been important since his promotion. I never forgot him forcing players onto the pitch while out of form. Arteta's development hinges on the midfield. Yeah, I think it does. I think the midfield has a ceiling. The midfield that we've had has been a little bit of a comfort blanket and a crutch. It doesn't have the ability to take us to that next level, so we need better. Whether or not Havertz and Rice end up being better remains to be seen. But I also think we overrate Xhaka and Partey to a level where we can't even envision that being better. Whereas Edu and Arteta do view it as probably a better option. Then the depth becomes an issue because people would have just preferred Xhaka and Partey to drop to the bench, but that's not really that realistic. And if you had to choose between the two, which, the poll says most of you guys would choose Partey to stay, but all things considered, Partey might need to go like Xhaka as well. So yeah, we're in an interesting position, I think, because nobody would have thought at the end of the season that we'd potentially lose both of them. I think all of us were kind of comfortable with, Xhaka going, but with Partey going, that adds some more questions into that midfield. Andre says Iniesta played the 8, and his defensive work rate and ability to press opponents to lose possession was overlooked. Eric says, despite that tackle he made, Xhaka for sure helped our defense. I'm not saying Havertz is bad. He is the most talented player offensive wise. Very nice. If you look at the goal Havertz scored against Newcastle. Yeah, and like I think, but I still feel like it's being overstated. I think because of Zinchenko, you have to have Xhaka because Zinchenko's not going to offer you anything defensively. So yeah, your left-sided midfielder needs to do a little bit more defensive work. But Xhaka's main role, like, because we dominated a lot of possession in a lot of games. In those games, so it was 95% of the games this past season, his main role was not defense. His main role was third man runs into the box, connecting the left half space, a little bit of build up, but getting into that box and making things happen. And so if 90% of your job, like I'll even make it smaller, 75% of your job as that position is scoring goals, assists, connecting in the half space, you know, is more in that realm, and 25% of his defense. When you bring in a player, what do you think their main attributes need to improve? Is the 75%, not the 25%. You find a way to make that 25% not as important and like supercharge the 75%. And I think that's why we went for a Havertz instead of just a better version of Granit Xhaka. And then you have to figure out how to minimize the need for that position to have all that defensive responsibility. And the way that you do that is, you know, maybe playing a Kiwi or a Tomiyasu in that left back space and using Timber as the pivot. Why do you guys think Timber's coming in? Like, I think all the pieces come together to create like a very obvious picture of like what Arteta and Edu are trying to do. It's not going to happen right away, but Timber will invert next to Declan Rice. And then so that foundation is a lot more secure and sturdy and defensive minded than Zinchenko and Thomas Partey. It alleviates the need for the left-sided center midfielder to have to make those tackles. So you can play with more attacking mids. Like, it feels like the picture is quite obvious, but because we're so stuck on last season's dynamics, we feel like they won't change. And we need players that are just better versions of what we already have when we need different types of players in general in order for that picture to come together. But yeah, we will come back to these conversations in a couple of weeks when you guys are like, "Oh, Jess, I didn't think that Havertz would play in those positions, but he is." Yeah. Femi says, "Preach, Jess. You are bang on. I think Havertz will be successful in that Xhaka role as long as we take away that 25% of defensive. Like, he'll still have to press and be aware and all that kind of stuff, but that part that you guys are talking about that you're worried about Havertz not being able to do, you don't need him to do it if Zinchenko is not always behind him. The way to kill us off is to have Havertz and Zinchenko on that same side all the time. Against the smaller teams, it's fine because we're going to dominate possession. But against the better teams, if you want to play Havertz in that position, it can't be Zinchenko. You need to use a Kiwi or a Tomiyasu on that side and do something different on the right-hand side. So, and we're going to have those options because Havertz won't always play there either. You know, sometimes, you know, it could be Declan Rice. And like you guys are saying, bring in a number 6 that's more similar to Partey. We'll have more options, which I think is the most interesting part of next season, or potentially what will be the most exciting part of next season, is having different layers and different options and not just being like hamstrung to one thing. Because we did kind of become a little bit stagnated and samey until like Trossard came in. Things kind of changed a little bit more. The dynamics changed. But there was a certain point in the season where it became very obvious what we were trying to do. Most teams couldn't stop us, but the better teams, they figured out a way. So yeah. Saksham saying, just imagining the future where we are taking L's for Kai, slandering in the chat. I'm just saying, like, if I'm wrong and he never plays there, then I will come on here and say you guys are right. But I'm just using deductive reasoning. Arteta said he's going to play in midfield, so he's going to play in midfield. Triple C says, truth is there's more talent and a higher ceiling in a midfield trio of Havertz, Odegaard, Rice than Xhaka, Odegaard, and Partey. The skepticism may be the chemistry and maybe experience. And that's the only thing that I worry about, is that the chemistry was really there with the last midfield trio that we had. They really understood their roles and they worked really well off of each other, and the guys behind them, like, you guys remember that original, like, starting 11 that we had, um, never lost a game. Partey, Xhaka, Odegaard, Jesus, Martinelli, Saka, White, Ramsdale, Saliba, Gabriel, and Zinchenko never lost a game. So there was definitely some good synergy in that group, but that group could still get better and the dynamics can change and you can have different layers to it. And so we can't just stop because that team was good. We have to do different things. And Arteta's always, I think, played around with the double tens. He's never had the right six, I think, to do it, but Rice just might be that player. So we will see. Um, let's see, a couple more minutes of this. Question from Asmaron says, should we look at players from the relegation teams like Tyler Adams, James Ward-Prowse, Harvey Barnes, Sulemana, Nanto? We are in for Lavia. Is it possible as an opportunity to have squad depth? I mean, maybe I could do a show on relegation players that would be interesting to look at. I think some of the better ones have already been picked off in James Maddison, Tielemans. I think West Ham are trying to use the money that they're taking from us to get Harvey Barnes. So I think a lot of those players might be already kind of like spoken for. But Leicester, I don't really see any players there that would really help us out. Like you guys said, Ndidi is still there, but there's a reason why he's still there. Southampton, Alcaraz, he looks like a good player, but at the same time, do we need a player in that position? Newcastle have already took Livramento, which is probably the only other player off of Southampton besides Lavia that I would be interested in anyway. And Leeds, I love Tyler Adams. I'm American. I love him. He's also an Arsenal fan, but I feel like Arsenal's level is higher than his. And so I think an Aston Villa, who he's been linked to, is probably a better kind of like landing point for him. Nanto is good, but does he improve us? Not really. I think him and Suleiman are kind of in that same camp of like very talented up and coming players, but I think we need better than that. They don't score very many goals, and our wingers have to score goals. And if something were to happen to Saka or Martinelli, I don't think you want to have to rely upon two players that don't score enough goals. So yeah, I think I don't see very many players that I'd be desperate to take off of those teams, but yeah, I can look at it and take another think about it another time, but I don't know. So people are saying James Ward-Prowse. I don't rate him. I think if football was kind of like American football and you had like special teams or something like that, and you could bring a player on for just like a certain thing and then take them off, then yeah, you do James Ward-Prowse because you could just sub him in for a dead ball scenario and sub him right off. But other than that, I don't want him in my midfield. So, Phillips says Havertz is 10 versus low blocks, Partey plus new DM in a double pivot versus top team. Xhaka doesn't fit anymore. This is probably the easiest way to say it. Yeah, against most teams that we're going to dominate, you would want like a Havertz or somebody like that. Against teams where it's a little bit more scary, it's up north, it's cold, you might want to play Partey or the player that's going to replace him with Rice. Is the best thing. But Xhaka, I just don't see where he fits in because there needs to be breathing room for ESR and Vieira. And he's blocking him. He's gonna block him. And looking at Smith Rowe, he looks, ready to go. He looks fresh. He looks sharp. I have questions. I had questions about him, but hearing what he's saying and in the media and talking about how he's like desperate to get into the team, if he's up for it, Emil Smith Rowe could be a very, very useful option. It wasn't too long ago where he was one of our best players, so I back Emil Smith Rowe to be somebody that gets more minutes and is used, and does well next season. And hopefully Vieira does as well, because both of them could be on the chopping block next summer if they don't do anything. Elisa says Timber coming in could mean more minutes for Tierney. I don't think there's a world where Tierney stays, but in theory, having Timber could open up an opportunity for Tierney to have a bigger role. I just wonder if Arteta doesn't just really like Tomiyasu better, and Kivior better, because they fit more of the center back mold. And Arteta seems to either like the midfield role or the midfield mold for a fullback, or the center back mold for a fullback. And Tierney doesn't really fit either one of those. Love Tierney to stay, but also we need to sell. And the only way you can sell is selling players with value. And Tierney has great value. So maybe you sell him. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get out of here, you guys, though. But Lias and Terry are about to do a show at 6 on the Football Terrace. If you guys want to tune in there, I'm sure they're gonna go over transfer rumors for all of the top 6 and just have a little chit chat about that. So go ahead and head over there. But before you guys do that, make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you guys thought in the comments. We'll be back hopefully tomorrow talking about done deals for Timber and or Rice. Hopefully nothing else breaks today. It's getting a little bit later, but I have this weird feeling something might happen later. But we'll see. If anything breaks, I'll be here. But love you guys, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Bye, guys.